extent that legislation has or has not made a difference, the question remains as to what role parents, the schools, and the religious community should be playing in seeing to it that television is a positive force for young people. To help us in probing these issues, we're pleased to have as our guest today Diane Holloway, television writer and critic for the Austin American-Statesman, and Augie Grant of the University of Texas School of Radio, Television, and Film. He is specializing in children's programming, and we welcome you both.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
And Diane, I'd like to pick up on an article that you wrote in the Statesman about this Children's Television Act, of whether it really is of any value or effect. Mm-hmm. And you made some statement there about wondering just how much it is.
Right. I think that it's always good to bring up a subject like that in a congressional situation, and it's good to address it. But I think it's impossible to legislate taste and morality on television, and I think that the debates that went around that happened before the legislation were probably more productive than the legislation itself, at least from what we've seen so far. As far as I can tell, it has had no impact on the big three networks. There is no more television program on, and what's on is not any better in terms of educational value or pro-social values. As far as I can tell, it's still the same. It's still ad-driven. It's still very, very commercial fare, and it's not any better as a result of legislation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, if I could, I'd like to disagree with you on that point. I think the networks have realized that the type of programs they were providing weren't enough to satisfy the affiliates. Remember that the law was designed to make local TV stations provide the programs, but to the extent that these local stations get programs from the networks, they said to the networks, give us something. So you have shows like Beekman's World that had been in syndication that was picked up by CBS and now shows on CBS stations such as Channel 7. Mm-hmm. You have other shows, NBC with Name Your Adventure, that was an adventure show, a little bit of geography mixed in. Fox with Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, again a geography spin on a show. The networks still have as many commercials as before because they've got to pay for the programming somehow. But there is more programming that has this educational element than before. Whether kids are watching it or not is another question.
Those shows were pre-existing. I mean, I don't think there's any. I don't think there are any more shows as a result of legislation. I mean, those shows were pre-existing. They weren't developed specifically for the Television Act.
All of those were developed after the act.
Not Carmen Sandiego.
The Fox version was.
Okay.
Which is something very
fine point. I don't think the networks have improved.
Okay, so there is some debate maybe about how much effect it's had in terms of new programming that's come online since. But in terms of making people more aware of the impact of the media on the young, I think in your article you were saying it has made people more self-conscious in this regard. Mm-hmm. One of the big debates, I know, before the show, Augie, you were saying, academically speaking, how much influence does television have on children? And the assumption is it has a lot. It's one of the big influences. I think you were raising the question with me whether it is that great or not.
Exactly. When you try and look at television's influence, it's very easy for anyone in society to point to television as something that is doing bad things to kids or doing bad things to teenagers or whatever. The academic evidence is very mixed on that. The one thing we know for sure is the most important influences on kids are the interpersonal influences. Number one, their family. Number two, their peers. Number three, the other groups that they're involved in, schools, their church, etc. That's where the kids get most of their information. That's where they shape most of their behavior.
That's what sociologists would call primary relationships.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And any media effect comes after those effects. So if you have a relationship, and it has been established that children who watch more television tend to be more aggressive. We don't know whether that's television causing them to be more aggressive, or whether the more aggressive kids watch TV, or whether there's something in the family environment that makes the same thing that makes kids more aggressive also makes them watch more TV.
Let's move it out of the academic setting for a moment, Diane, just in terms of your experience and other people's experiences they've reported to you in your work. What's your feeling about how much of an influence it is?
Well, I think it's an enormous influence. I think children watch way too much television, and regardless how good or bad television is, they're still watching way too much of it. You know, when you sit down and watch 3 hours at a stretch, that's too much even of good television. You can watch 3 hours of Sesame Street, and that's too much. There are studies that indicate that watching television or violent television can have an aggressive effect on the child. There are also studies that show that it can make children passive because they're sitting. They're not out playing. They're not actively reading a book. They're not actively doing anything in life. They're letting it all come to them, come into their home. And I think that may be a worse influence on children than the debatable aggressive.
Well, you know, one of the things that Marshall McLuhan, I think, did us a favor on when he was talking about the media is the message, that apart from the content, it conditions us. I mean, shorter attention spans and more passivity and expecting instant solutions sort of thing, that it just subconsciously has an influence of that sort.
Exactly. I think children who watch a lot of sitcoms expect all of their family problems and domestic strife to be resolved in 22 minutes because that's how long it takes a sitcom to resolve their problems. And I think there are unrealistic expectations that children probably develop watching The Perfect Family on television, and conversely probably sets up a lot of fears when they watch a very violent family on television.
Well, in the 28 minutes that we have, we can't solve all of these issues in regard to children's TV, but I would really like to move into this whole area of what we can do, you know, positively to be part of an active, proactive rather than just a passive posture with our kids and in schools and churches and so on. And and I think part of that is to be producers of programs, not just wait for the networks to pipe it in. I know, Augie, you've done some work locally in that regard.
Yeah, I created an educational children's TV show a few years ago that has not gone into syndication yet. We still have hopes for it down the line. But with the increasing availability of video cameras both in the home and in the school, kids have an opportunity to get involved in the production of media messages. And one of the big things that this teaches them in working with literally hundreds of kids all over Central Texas and helping them produce their videos for my TV show, working with the medium, having them be a part of it, teaches them a lot about consuming the medium. It's like trying to teach a child to read. It helps if the child is also writing. If they're in the process of putting ideas together, that whole process of writing helps them in interpreting what they're reading. The same thing happens with video. The other thing that you've got to look at, the real strong influence in here, is interpretation. One of the things that TV does is opens a new world for the audience, things that especially children have not been exposed to before, and that many of those things are subject to misinterpretation. One of the key things that I like to emphasize is that parents should be available to answer questions from their kids about what they see on TV. Because a lot of times kids see messages they don't understand, words they don't understand, situations they don't understand. Well, I disagree with Diane and the fact that seeing a sitcom family makes a kid want a perfect family. The situations that are set up, if a parent has a chance to explain it, can, especially early on, and I'm talking about between the ages of 4 and 8, can help the child become a better consumer of television.
Do you watch TV with your kids?
I do. I have a 7-year-old son and a 13-year-old stepdaughter. She's more or less on her own. I think when they get to be that age, they've either on the right path or not. I mean, there are shows that we don't let her watch, but you know, she's pretty much on her own. But my 7-year-old, he is not allowed to just go and turn on the television. And one point that I'd like to make is I think it is important for people like Augie to be producing their own shows. It doesn't do us any good to sit around and wring our hands over how bad television has gotten. It's not going away. It's there. It's a pervasive medium. What we need to do is make it better, those people who are producing television shows, and those of us who are on the outside who have children or who are television consumers or television critics, as I am. It's up to us to make the public better educated about what they're watching and to use the medium wisely. There are shows that can benefit children. I think that my son would have been greatly disadvantaged had he not grown up with Sesame Street. He went into preschool knowing the alphabet, knowing how to count to 20, knowing about different cultures. He had probably never seen a Japanese person in real life, but he certainly was introduced to Japanese children and culture through Sesame Street. And I think the important thing for us to do in the 90s and going into the next millennium is to remember that it's up to us to teach children and to teach adults too the best way to use this medium and to not you know, just try to get rid of it or just to spend all of our
Or try
time
to
criticizing
legislate
it.
it.
I mean, people need to learn through the home, through their schools. There are pilot programs in many schools around the country where children are taught how to watch television. And the same is true in churches. I know you and I were discussing earlier that a lot of churches, through Sunday school or just through general lectures, talk about how to watch television wisely and how to get the most out of it.
I want to come back to that because television awareness training as a movement is something that is very practical and very close to home, and people can do it immediately, sort of thing. One thing that most of us can't do, though, is to do what you are working on, Augie. You said you're going out and getting young people to submit videos.
I had been going out, and
how does that work? I mean,
well, the show again. It's very difficult to get a good TV show put together and put on the air. I've had, obviously, many years of experience in TV and training in that, and I found myself totally overwhelmed with the project.
how many children were involved?
We had videos from over 100 children from all over Central Texas that were submitted to the show. We produced 3 episodes that aired in 8 markets across the country. And
what was it called?
It was called Smart Show. We got great ratings, but there is a problem in the business. I think that we're talking about education. The biggest education has to go on, from my perspective, within the business, letting people know that children will watch things other than pure entertainment shows. You can put an educational element in if you have entertaining elements. And we're very slowly, if you're talking about effects of the Children's Television Act, one effect of that act has been to bring some of these shows online, and the distributors are finally saying, hey, maybe kids will watch that. Maybe we can do something. Well, now the local broadcasters, the people like Jane Wallace at Channel 36 and Londa Trial here and Ardith Dirks at Channel 24 have known this. They're the people who are doing something or have done something for the local community. But it takes a lot of money to do a good TV show, and you're looking at having to do it on a national level.
Right. Well, you were, I think, commenting on what Augie was doing in terms of this does produce television awareness training. I mean, as kids are, they kind of demythologize it,
Exactly.
it seems to me, as he described it.
I think that's accurate. And the schools, a lot of schools do have video programs where children make their own TV shows and watch them and show them to the class and sometimes to the whole school, and that's a really nice thing. A lot of high schools around the country have their own newscasts. They go around the high school and do their own local community, high school community newscasts and show them in the high school, and I think those are all well and good. But I would disagree just for a second with Augie saying that it costs a lot to put on a television show. I don't know what the budget was for Channel 24's Pepe's Magic Tales, but that, I'm relatively sure, was not an expensive program. They have a host, and then they bring in teachers from other schools, and it's a literacy program. It's storytelling, and they use librarians and teachers who I'm sure are not paid a great deal of money, and they bring in children from the schools to participate. And it's a wonderful little show that I'm sure doesn't cost much, and it is a wonderful educational show.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to be wonderful to continue this conversation in just a few minutes, but we're going to have to pause here for a break. Stay tuned with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Serving Austin means serving you. Each day, Austin Metropolitan Ministries is religion in action, providing affordable housing, caring for the elderly, marching against hunger, and much more. AMM promotes understanding, cooperation, and social involvement. So when we ask for your help, we're really asking to help you, Austin. To find out how you can help Austin Metropolitan Ministries help Austin through its member organizations, just call 472-7627.
I love you, you love me, we're a happy family with a great big hug and a kiss from me to you.
Okay, Diane, we have a little image of Barney here with us. And what's your reading on Barney as a phenomenon today?
Well, it's real popular right now for people to criticize Barney and you know, rake this poor purple dinosaur over the coals. The fact of the matter is, this large stuffed creature is a hero to lots of very small children, and there's nothing wrong with Barney. He's you know, he's a very happy, sweet little guy. He's sort of like an animated Fred Rogers, who's you know, everybody's hero, who's raised children from, you know, the early 60s on. There's nothing wrong with him. I think parents are sort of making fun of him now because he's very, very sweet. He's not realistic. There's nothing real about him.
You think he's too sweet, Augie?
No, I think Barney's great. If a kid has to develop a relationship with someone on TV, if we're talking about a child between the ages of 2 and 6, I'd much rather it be Barney than the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for example. One of the things we have to realize is we can't lump all children into one group. At a certain age, children like a certain type of thing. When they get older, their tastes change, their media habits change. The key is establishing a good foundation. Barney helps to do that. He said, look for the positive values, have fun watching TV. The same kids today that can't stop singing Barney tunes 2 years from now are going to hide their Barneys so their friends don't see they have them.
Sure, right. And that's sort of the way it has been with Mr. Rogers. I mean, I've heard that his audiences are really young kids and older folks, and that those in between are a little embarrassed by some of his manner, but still there is a model there, and partly maybe it's because Fred Rogers is an ordained Presbyterian minister.
Sure, that's the reason.
That's a big thing to do with it. But he talks directly to the kids, and one of the things that Mr. Rogers just blows up is this idea that kids have short attention spans. Kids do not have short attention spans. If you look at a Mr. Rogers show, if you look at the pace, a very slow pace, he takes his time moving from one thing to another. We don't have to hit kids with a slam, bang, quick cut, quick image, fast image. That attracts adults, but kids have longer attention spans, and they'll stay tuned for something like Mr. Rogers.
Feeding a fish sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Rogers, too, has a lasting effect on children, because I interviewed him out in Los Angeles one time, and it was one of the highlights of my career as a television critic to interview Fred Rogers, and I'm sure everybody thought I was crazy, but I was starstruck for a minute. He's a wonderful man, and he's had such an impact on several generations of children, but he told me this wonderful story when he was asked to give a speech at a Princeton graduation, and he was a little nervous about that because he's used to talking to children. And he got up to give his little speech at Princeton, and this whole sea of graduates, these, you know, 21-year-old people, all stood up and started singing "It's a Wonderful Day in the Neighborhood." He said he was so touched and so moved, but that's the impact he has on kids.
Right. Well, I think, too, the thing about Rogers, he communicates values, and I suspect underneath it, in terms of his own life, there's a religious, spiritual dimension. I mean, I like you as you are, exactly and precisely. I think you turned out nicely. I'll sing it to a star, which is, for some folks, that's the gospel of accepting folks as they are. Right. But I think that the extent to which we, within the local community, we can bring the religious touch to it very directly, and I think both of you have indicated to me that you've done some work with churches to help this television awareness training process. What's been your experience on that?
Well, a lot of people are interested in having someone speak to church groups, and a lot of churches have ongoing programs in their Sunday schools and in their regular adult classes, giving advice to parents and to children. I think it's important not to bypass children in educating people how to use the medium. It's good that parents are told to watch their children and to watch with them and see what they watch, but children beyond a certain age, maybe beyond 8, are smart enough to know what's good for them or what should be good for them and what isn't. And I think churches can play a big role in that, and so can schools. And it shouldn't just be the parents. Parents need backup along the way. A lot of kids would listen to a preacher or a priest or a teacher possibly more readily than they would their own parent.
Tell me about where you have had a chance to be party to that.
Well, I spoke to my own church group, which is St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and it was very informative for me to hear questions that people had, and I think there ought to be more of that dialogue going on in a lot of places.
What's your experience along that line?
I've had a chance to talk with both church groups and daycare groups, and biggest impression I get from that is a lot of parents, most parents in fact, don't realize that they have to teach their kids how to watch TV. And I think that it's very important, as Diane says, to work with the children, but the most important message that I'd like to get out is that every parent needs to know from the time their child is born that they have a role in shaping how their child is using the medium, that they need to not necessarily watch everything with their child, but they need to be there to answer questions, to reinforce positive values, to identify the values that are not as desirable. And a lot of parents aren't aware of that. I remember one parent at a daycare center who said something to me about how her 2-year-old and 4-year-old just love to watch Cops. Now, this is a very violent show. It's fine for adults, but
Real violence.
Real violence, which is the most dangerous kind to show someone, and everyone knows it's realistic. And I said, haven't you ever watched the show? There's this disclaimer at the beginning of the show that says, you know, this parental discretion is advised. This is a graphically violent show. And that message had to be reinforced.
So the message you're bringing to, like in daycare centers, is be sure and be there with your kids, and to not just let it be a babysitter.
Exactly. I'm saying you don't have to necessarily be there with them, but know what they're watching and talk about what they're watching so that you can help them interpret what they're watching. And that's most important between the ages of 4 and 8.
All right. You know, one thing I think the religious community could do for people within their fellowships and beyond is maybe come up with like a 10 Commandments of watching TV.
Sure,
You know,
that'd be great.
Thou shalt turn the TV off when you have guests in, so that you're not, you know, you're attuned to them. You shall not forget that violence really does hurt people. You shall not covet all of the commercials you hear.
Well,
something like that.
Exactly. I think parents and churches and schools can help develop those sort of rules and disciplinary forms. I think everybody needs boundaries, and children that are beyond the age of where you have to sit down and watch every show with them. One interesting way of dealing with preteens and teenagers who watch an enormous amount of television that I think is a real inventive and effective way is to give them a television budget every week. So you have 2 hours, you spend them within this amount, with this framework. You can't go watch an HBO R-rated movie, but you can spend your 2 hours however you want to between Monday and Saturday, and then no TV on Sunday, or some way like that, so that they're learned to police themselves and to program themselves and spend that 30 minutes or that hour the way they want to.
The other thing that you can do that makes a real strong effect is make sure your kids are exposed to a lot of different types of programming.
Exactly.
They may not watch everything. They may choose to continue to watch the cartoons, but as long as they know different things are available, one or two of those things they'll choose to watch. And the television is such a strong socializing influence, teaching people how our social institutions work. More people learned, for example, how a small claims court worked from watching the People's Court than from ever going to court. And when kids are exposed to that socializing influence, that's a very good thing. Well, the parent can help steer the kids toward shows, and these can be comedies or dramas or documentaries, all kinds of shows that show how the institutions in society function.
Okay, but let's face one real big issue, and that is how many homes in which the parents aren't there, either in physical presence or emotional presence. But let's just take it the physical presence, latchkey kids, and those who have no parents around for significant periods of time. And here's the sex and violence on TV. What's your
Well, it's very
thought
easy.
about that?
It's very easy for white middle-class people to sit around and, you know, we have places to send our children, and a lot of other people do too, but it's very easy for us to sit around and say parents should always watch television with their children. The fact of the matter is an enormous number of children have no supervision in the afternoon and sometimes in the evenings. A lot of parents work at night. They're working 2 jobs. It's an economic reality. And there is an argument, a lot of parents who are in that situation will tell you, well, I prefer my child watching television, no matter how bad it is, than to get into trouble, than to go out and roam the streets, or to do whatever else might be even worse to do. So, you know, that's a social problem that's very, very difficult to figure out. I don't know what I would do if I were a single mother with 3 or 4 kids and I had 2 jobs to work. I'm not going to sit here and condemn somebody for putting their children in front of a television.
Right.
No.
But the question is, what can be done positively to help in situations where there are absentee mothers and fathers.
Well, the number one thing is a parent doesn't have to be watching every show with their kids. Watching a small amounts with them to help them interpret, knowing what the child's viewing schedule is, that makes a big factor. The other thing is that once the parent realizes, I am going to be responsible, even if the parent is not there, the parent can say, what did you watch? When the parent gets home, 2 minutes, say, what did you watch today? Was there anything interesting there? What did you like about it? Just that dialogue can be very important in helping to shape how a child perceives television and what they absorb.
Well, I think that's helpful because that indicates that not everybody has to do it the same way.
Exactly.
And you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time doing it, but it's quality time, again, and it's intentional parenting in that regard.
Yes, but the key is the parents have to take the personal responsibility. They can't say, we want the government to put regulations on to control it. That never works. It has to start with the family.
There's way too much buck passing. I mean, television has become just the all-consuming scapegoat in our society, I think, in terms of violence and sexual behavior and everything else. And people are just giving up their own personal responsibility for their children, for their families, for themselves. I mean, I get people call me at the office all the time just ranting and raving about how terrible some movie they watched from beginning to end was. It was just offensive, it was horrible, and my first question is always, why didn't you turn it off? Why didn't you change the channel, turn it off?
But you know what has not been offensive and horrible is our discussion. It's just been great having you here today.
Thank you.
And I think you brought us some information and insight and inspiration. So thank you, Augie Grant and Diane Holloway.
Pleasure
for
to
being
be
with
here.
us. Thank you folks for looking in as well. And as Diane Holloway said in her article recently about the Children's Television Act, if nothing else, that act has helped make broadcasters aware and evaluate their programming. And I think this is what we're trying to do here today on Austin Faith Dialogue, and I hope it's worked for you. Be with us again next week on our next edition. In the meantime, on behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.
Call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.